directorial part, and then we'll discuss closing remarks, and I'll try to describe everybody's meeting time, meeting place, okay? So moving right along, part 2 of the fundamentals of policy and procedure development. You'll notice this, we get a little bit more in the technical side of it, the leadership side of it, and why you're here. When you talk about the content of a document, again, considering contextually what we've got here, I believe there's going to be 2 avenues by which we'll be able to look at a document. And it will be, number 1, through the existing documents that are already been developed, okay? And I know that you don't know this, or you know some of them, but we have documents out there that's already been created. And bringing those to the table for their respective subcommittees will be a starting point in a lot of this, okay? So we'll look at it and we'll say this is legit. I mean, I can already tell you on some of it, especially the building and grounds committee, when we meet together, you know, some of those we could probably just delete because we just don't use it. For example, like the equipment use, there's a whole page that's got that, and just, you know, if somebody's renting, you know, if it's a wedding, you know, you got to reserve a wedding planner. I mean, there's a lot of I don't know if that's exact wording, but it's all kinds of stuff like the audio visual usage and how you're going to use that and all this stuff. So honestly, since I've been here, I haven't dealt with any of that. So we could probably just do away with that. You see what I'm saying? And just make it simple. That would be for us. So existing policy procedures, revisions of these would be fine. What they call the process re-engineering. Looking at the old, possibly scrapping it, developing a new. But at least you've got something to start with. And that's going to be an old policy that you sort of resurrect and make it new for where you are now. And then, of course, if we're going to create new content for a new manual, that'll be there as well. So existing content and then the creation of new content. Beulah will look to develop a manual from existing policy procedures. And these will be the things we'll look for. We're going to look at what we have. We're going to see what is implied. That is, I'm not going to try to, bless you. One more time. Bless you. Yeah.
I think that's it.
If you remember back to our first session, I said what I desire is an explicit document. Explicit. And my understanding in church administration, that is really the dividing line in administration. What is explicit versus what is implicit? We have a lot of implied policies in this church. A lot of implied, what I mean by that is you got a policy, you've got a policy, you've got a policy, you've got a policy. We got to figure out if that is a strong enough policy in our life or in that, then we need to make sure that we just get it out there and agree on it. And if we don't, then, you know, maybe we develop it later, you know, and maybe we just say, as is personal preference, it's not worth any policy. You know, maybe it's not worth pursuing. So we got to figure out what's implicit and make it explicit, which is black and white on a piece of paper. Is there any confusion or the potential for confusion? If there is any confusion or possibility for that, in your subcommittee, you're thinking through it. As finance, is there anything that could be a possible confusion? I'm not saying it is, but it could be. And then do we address it? In the same way as building and ground, personnel, so on and so forth. I think it would be always necessary, and we just talked about this, what is lawful? Are we doing something in the church that is just not lawful, that we need to look at? That we need to buckle down on, that we need to be held accountable to. Just because we're a church doesn't mean we are excluded from the laws of the land. And so if there's something that is lawful that we need to take care of, doggone it, we better be doing it or we're going to be nailed one of these days. And the outcome of that will not be pretty. What is protective? What will protect us? We'll identify a process, a problem, an issue, concern that could be improved upon. The content, as I say it again, we will strive to be simple. Step-by-step procedures will always be best. This, of course, gets down into the who part of it, the what will be done, when it'll be done, why it is necessary, and how the policy is to be implemented, and will be detailed in a document such as we'll try to develop. So the who, what, when, where, how, why. Who, what, when, where, how, blah, blah, blah. All that good stuff, okay? All that will be, I don't even know, yeah, I'm recording, there we go, thought I wasn't recording, we're gonna start over. But all that will be in this, okay? And then, of course, we'll talk about why that's important here in just a minute. Policies and procedures, or administrative resources, you might say, they must be clearly articulated to maintain the integrity. The purpose of why the policy is being created. Is it a financial stewardship issue? Is it for accountability purposes? Is it for instruction? There's a book, a new book, Simon, I don't know if you've read it, but Simon somebody, I can't remember his last name. Yeah, Start With Why. That's a book, Start With Why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And, you know, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, that's just, among other things, makes it very hard to really have any traction or purpose in an organization or even a church. So why are we doing what we're doing? You know, why are we doing this? Trying to answer that question could be very difficult, but man, I don't know if there's many questions that would be much more profitable to answer than that. Because if you can answer the why, then you can get somewhere at that point. Probably a lot of stuff we deal with in church, we don't know why we do what we do. You know what our answer is? Well, that's why we've always done it. No. Well, our forefathers put it up. Well, why'd they do it? Well, you know, it gets back to that idea, you know, this girl was cutting a ham. On both ends, she put it in a pan. You know, somebody's asking her question, why do you cut the ham? And they traced it back to generation after generation. They discovered that her great-great-great-grandmother didn't have a big enough pan for the ham to fit in, so she cut the ends off, and she passed that tradition down to her daughter. And she kept doing it because her grandma said it. She didn't realize how much potential she had in a pan to cook the full ham. And so church, I mean, the reality is we do a lot of stuff sometimes that just because we've always done it, we don't realize the potential that we have in implementing something that will be for us, for now, for the future. And so having these things in mind when we think about it is very important. The specifics of who's it going to affect? Youth, children, it's going to be a staff person, it's going to be a certain segment of the membership, it's going to be committee members that it'll affect. Understanding who this will be needs to be clearly articulated in this. If it involves an upward director, you know, he would need to, and she would need to understand that. If it is a children's director, Brother Curtis would need to know this is who it's affecting, and then all the children that are within his ministry. Policy procedure, okay, it's under the same, clearly articulated. Something else we would always want to keep in mind for the sake of keeping things in date, you want to consider the date of origination. Whatever date that policy goes in place will be documented on that, okay? Just for record keeping purposes. So we know when this was developed. And again, that helps. Again, I know we got to think beyond ourselves. If N ceased to exist, I want you to be able to pick a document up and say, this is where we're at. It was developed on this day. You see, there should be no guessing game to that. It just puts a stamp on when this was developed. If there's going to be a revision to the document, that revision date needs to be put on there. So again, the church can keep track of that. So in 10 years, they'll be able to look back and say, this was revised on these dates. You may think, why is this necessary? It may not be a real easy answer to it other than just keeping track of when things were changed and perhaps understanding why they would be. Keeps the integrity of the document. Of course, I've got what if there's a transition of leadership and dispositions of future leaders for success. So if N ceases to exist, the next pastor comes in, he picks up a document, he'll know that this was developed, this was revised on this date. And it's just going to give him some context, because if he's got questions and he's never been a part of Beulah, he can ask one of you. If you were here on this day, what was going on in this? If there's any questions, there can be a reference back to what's taking place. So it just positions ourselves for the future. Of course, the names of whom will provide the accountability and leadership of the policy and procedure. If it's an Awana leader, that Awana leader needs to have his or her name attached to that, because they're the one providing leadership. And quite honestly, in our context, they're going to be the one that's going to have to enforce it. Ian won't be able to enforce it. I'm up here on Wednesday nights, just to be real with you. I can't enforce that. I can't enforce all the rules, but the leader of that policy, in order for us to make this work, the only thing I know is that that leader within that department, within that ministry, is going to have to make sure that it is enforced or that it is followed. And if there's any compromise, then they can come see me, and then we can discuss it. You see? Or they can come before the church and discuss it, whatever the route they choose to take. But a leader has to lead in this, and that's going to help the integrity of it. And I think clearly articulating that helps that leader to do that. Of course, the steps, how the policy will be fulfilled, if there needs to be steps. A lot of things that we're going to develop may not be like 5 steps. It may just be a simple policy. It may just be an administrative resource. Again, we're not trying to be the next Lone Oak or Trace Creek or Paducah First Baptist or New Harmony. We're going to be Beulah. Key information that would help eliminate conflict or miscommunication should be included. So anything to be as clearly as we can, as simple as we can, we need to be in that. Administrative resource must be not only clearly articulated, but it needs to be readily accessible. It needs to be readily accessible to maintain compliance, which means if I hand out a survey to you and I ask you, where is a policy and procedure document? You ought to be able to say, it is on the foyer table. It is underneath the foyer table. It is in the top cabinet, on the right cabinet, in the right office, on the right side, whatever it may be. But you need to know that. You need to have some sort of understanding so it's readily accessible. And so there's a proverb, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. Sometimes I feel like that's the way I'm operating in my life. I don't know where I'm going, I'm just going on some path. And you get wore out doing that, won't you? If a policy procedure matter remains hidden, will anyone hear it? Every member should have one, and every new member should have one. And I've talked to some of the new members that come in here, and I described to them sort of what I would like in a document that you're helping, and most all of them respond with a nod, and yeah, that would be nice if I could have something to help me understand. Because we have people coming to this church now that have joined this church that they don't have any family in the church. They don't have any connections other than they just love God and they think it's a good church. And so something like this is just so beneficial in the process. Of course, I've said this several times. It comes up here. It must be revisable. I think that should allow all of us to breathe a little easier. Any document that we have, I mean, look, the church has authority in that. You know, it's not like you're forcing or you're taking away authority from the church, and it's always revisable. And in that, what's the beauty of it, in my research in policy and procedure development, Stephen Page wrote a 4-part volume on policy and procedure development. What he said in his research and his leadership and administration is he sort of implies that really every organization that develops a manual should revisit it a year later. Just no matter what, they should revisit a year later and see, is this working? Is this relevant at all? And if it's not, you know what? At least you tried. At least you tried to do something. But always revisiting that idea. Is it working? And if it's not, revise it if need be. God, it is adaptable. You can adapt as times change, as people change, finance change, ministries change, whatever. Because it is revisable, it should be kept up to date. Shouldn't be any issues there. Established policy or procedure that does not reflect current practices is about as effective as having no written guidelines at all. And that's just that. In our subcommittees, as we meet here in just a few minutes with the first one, and then tomorrow we'll meet with 2 others, and then Tuesday night we'll meet with one, and then next Sunday afternoon we'll meet with the last one before November the 30th on that Friday of presenting something. There's going to be really 4 areas that we'll just consider. And these are not hard and fast, they're just in my mind as we sit down and talk. There'll be an agenda, and it's just going to be real informal. You know, we're not going to make this some kind of executive session where you got to be all stressed out about it. But there's going to be an agenda. Here's some things that I've dealt with that I'll bring to the table, just things to think about. You'll, of course, collaborate in that, help me understand where you're at. Not going to be hard feelings at all. I mean, forevermore. You know, I'm just trying to help the church. That's my goal in this. I'm not here to be deceptive or, you know, get run over and, you know, hurt. I mean, I want to do what's best for the church, and I need your input. I need it. Issues being, these are things the teams need to discuss that are not on the agenda, and we always chase rabbits, don't we? So there's going to be an issues bin that we can think about, the minutes. Of course, I got Joni's name up here. She's going to try to be in there. What she's going to do is she's just going to be recording, writing down everything that is said by everybody for the most part, just so we can clearly document that. Because a part of this is you exercising what you learned in these sessions. So I know you don't see that, but I have that thinking and I have that understanding, is how do you interpret some of the things we talked about. So some of that is for the academic purposes of this, to be honest with you. But I'd like for you to think through, and you already have wrestled through what some of this means, and see if it's worth anything, or maybe somebody else can learn from someday. And then the tools that'll help us, I've got a little guideline that we'll just try to answer, like 6 questions we'll look at, try to figure out, and look at. The leadership of church policy and procedure, that's where you come into this deal. Of course, I've got, this is always a clear, humbling word here for me, always. Brother Scott just mentioned it, and I say this, and I don't want to wear these words out. I mean it with all my heart. Thank you, thank you, thank you for giving up your time to be here. I hope that in this journey that you learned maybe a little something. I hope that Beulah Baptist Church will be better because of you being here. So thank you for giving up your time. I know it's precious, but we're getting further and further along as we go. Because you are a volunteer, this always makes things just, you know, they are what they are. You said a professor that hated that saying, it is what it is. But you're a volunteer, by and large, the church is full of volunteers. That means they're going to give based on their passion, really, to be here. I've got this leadership issues here, the dangers in church leadership, the Lone Ranger syndrome. It's primarily when the pastor or maybe a minister within the church seeks to do it all himself, or is left isolated by the church, and many times troubles are going to avail. We've already mentioned those: burnout, conflict, lack of representation. And that's not only for the pastor, I use me there, but that's for any leader in the church. If they try to do it all themselves and all alone, you're going to get burned out eventually. And conflict can come up, and then there's a lack of representation. That's why I appreciate you being here as a representative within this church. When the pastor is a Lone Ranger, he fails to equip the church. And I want an Ephesians 4 ministry where you can be equipped to do the work of the ministry and find fulfillment in that, being a Christian. Letter C there, to be sure the pastor is tasked with leading. However, he cannot drive. I cannot drive the sheep. You're a volunteer. I can't drive you. And because that won't leave any lasting legacy. The church will revert back to whatever was. If you don't buy into this, and Ian just lays it down on you, and I say this is what you're going to do, you're going to adopt this policy and procedure manual because I said it and God led me to it. You're going to look at me and you're going to say, and you're going to throw it away probably. Not everybody will, but if you don't buy into it, it won't work. It's just not going to work. Because what I'll find myself doing is constantly pounding it into you and out of you, and you're going to be cold to it. So you got to have a passion to want this to work, really. And I hope that leading us along this path will somewhat grow this desire in being effective stewards, the ministry God's given to us. The greatest test of any one thing in a church or organization is its enduring effect. What we do now, I'm telling you, I've said it many times over, by the grace of God, I hope that what we do now will endure to the next generation. That's my heart, is to build a ministry that outlasts me, to build a ministry that outlasts us. Is what I'm doing going to make a difference? And I've got in parentheses here, or in italicized, I should say, time really will tell, and it will probably be long after I'm gone, and long after you're gone, whether what we did really made a difference. So investing now, we know God will help us make a difference. That's why leadership development is so crucial, and that's why you're here, to assist in development and the implementation. Another issue that could be when one or two people have authority. Normally it's patriarch or matriarch of the church. They'll fill this role. Again, to reference Pastor Michael Atherton, he said it is unhealthy and unwise and downright malicious to keep all the administrative functions of the church under the lock key of one or two people. And I thought that was a good point. It is malicious for any leader to keep all the administrative control under the lock key of one person or two people. The church deserves better than that. And the church deserves for the church to be the church. And in that, understanding that there's a team that can be equipped in leading in that. I've got here the best demonstration of church leadership. Teamwork makes the dream work, y'all. You know what I'm talking about? Teamwork makes the dream work, always. Multiple gifts coming together to function as the body. Now, there's already been a dissertation that has been written that I researched for this. It was written back, I think, in the year 2000 from the American Baptist Theological Seminary. I discovered that. I requested it through my library at Midwestern, and they sent it to me. But in his dissertation, which I studied, someday somebody may study what we're doing here, he said, true leadership is not demonstrated by one man doing all the work, but it is demonstrated in equipping others to do the work and then giving them the opportunity to do the work. D.L. Moody said this. He said he would rather put 1,000 men to work than to do the work of 1,000 men. And the pride, within all of us is, I mentioned it last night, I think, well, I'll just do it myself because I know what needs to be done. I don't need anybody's help because everybody else is going to get in my way. I do that. I fight that often. I know how to do it. I know what I want to do. I just wish everybody would just kind of stay out of my way, and I'm just going to get this done. I can run faster that way, but I won't go farther. And when you think about putting 1,000 men to do the work versus having all the accolades that you've done 1,000 men, the reality is, the better option is always going to be having those 1,000 men working in the field versus one man receiving accolades for doing the work of 1,000 men, because that one man will soon fall, and then nobody does anything. So having leadership like you is so important for the church. Team collaboration will provide the greatest potential for effective facilitation within the life of the church. When we have multiple people scattered throughout the church, that's you, that believes in what is produced, they'll serve as the nerve endings that can respond on the spot. Ultimately, I might say, helping alleviate the necessity for one person to provide all the information. So you being here, you scattered throughout the church, if there's ever an issue that may come up, hopefully, if you hear about it, you'll be able to put the fire out. Just that you'll be able to respond to it. That you'll be able to help alleviate any kind of big conflict. I mean, God help us. We say, I don't know anything about that. I've just spent, about 10 hours with him talking about all this stuff, but I don't know anything about it, It's kind of like Peter with Jesus, I don't know who he is. So you helping alleviate helps the church be the church. Honest to goodness. Man, God has gifted every one of you in a special way. All of you got different gifts. None of you are the same in here. And God don't want you to be the same. But in this, if we could make this work, some kind of administrative resource, whatever it may look like, you can help alleviate any kind of issue before it gets out of hand. Team collaboration will provide the greatest potential for transparency and accountability, and this is never more important than the administrative practices of the church. The pastor should not be the sole spokesperson for every person and over every issue. Thus, he equips others, Ephesians 4 ministry, that Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus, equip others to do the work of the ministry. Obviously, PR purposes, I'm going to be standing up before people. Obviously, I'll speak to just about every issue, I guess. But I'm talking about in the context of doing everyday ministry, for you to have an understanding that will help all of us be a lot more effective and a lot fresh. Of course, the delegation within church leadership, I mentioned this earlier, Every policy, procedure, administrative resource will have a specific area of concentration, whether it be missions, ministry, finance. Your subcommittee will allow you to be somewhat of a spokesperson for that area of ministry and the administrative resources that we may have. You'll sort of be the expert, so to speak, on that area. You'll be the expert on that area, and you'll help in interpreting what we might produce. The most profitable approach is not only to have written documentation, but teams of people that help interpret it and defend it. And so you can have a manual, it can sit there, and nobody can read it, nobody can look at it, we don't have to follow it. But if you make that document come to life in the ministry of the church, that's what's really going to be most beneficial. Of course, this is just some of the studies I've done, leadership study according to congregation size. You'll see here we fit this. A man did Norris Smith did a study. He was out of Missouri Baptist Convention, on different sizes of churches and how they do ministry. So he started with like a 50 to 100 membership, 100 to 175, 250. He goes all the way up to thousands of people. And he just studied these churches. How do they function? What are some key characteristics of how they're thriving? One among the 7 of the characteristics for 175 to 250 people that produced a healthy church. Notice what they did. They modeled that administration is done purposely, and communication is key to functioning healthy. In his study and characteristics of studying congregations that average between 175 to 250, which we fit in on the morning worship, he's one of the 7 characteristics of a healthy church is doing well in their community and for the kingdom. One of those characteristics is that administration is done purposely and communication is key to functioning healthy. Wow. We've already discovered that today, haven't we? Really. You know, if we could just do some of these things, maybe we're just a little bit crisper on it. You know, maybe we just shore up a little bit. It's going to help so very much. The ministry leadership team is tasked with the job of booyah, communication. We're tasked with the job of simply be communication. Now, you don't have to stand up every service and be like, I'm a part of the policy and procedure manual team. I'm a part of the policy and procedure manual team. Here's your manual. That's not what I'm talking about. You're just going to be. You're going to exist. And when we're trying to find a destination, and we've got something in place, and you see there's a storm, that's when we step up. And that's when we say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pursue this. If you don't have it, you know what? I think I heard a lot of sessions. I don't remember which one it was, but this is what we need to do. I think this is an approach we could take. And we can come together. And even talk about it, discuss it in the context of helping the church be the church. We just about done. Got a few things. I'm not going to read all these. I know some of you are about ready to roll out of here. But the theory behind the ministry leadership team being developed and utilized for administrative effectiveness, Warren Bird, George Beard, Warren Bird and George Bird, they wrote 4 reasons and why administrative effectiveness is good and utilized in the church. When you have a team of people together leading something like we're doing, it creates a forum for all of us to speak to. Second, you he's got board members, but as a team or committee, whatever you want to call yourself, you'll serve as a role model to the congregation. Now this in turn, I hope will build trust both in the proposed written document, but also in the senior pastor's leadership. Thirdly, this separates the senior leadership's thoughts from the selected team's own thoughts. I'm not naive to things I think you don't think, the things you think I don't think. And that's why we need one another. And that's why we'll be better together than we will be separate. And that's why I'm throwing some of this stuff out there. If I'm thinking it and you're just not in it at all, then I need to scrap it. And I want to be hopefully at a point in my life that I can say, yeah, okay, then that's fine. It's not best for the church. And we'll develop it. Or we won't develop it. But you're going to help me think through it and see what's best. Number 4, the board or the team will represent collectively a unifying voice in the direction of the church. Granted, the senior pastor will always be responsible for equipping them, but it ultimately streamlines and organizes the church for effective ministry. Dr. Larry Purcell, of course, he's our local church consultant at the Kentucky Baptist Convention. He's a veteran, served in the military, so he's very up to speed on all this, raising the bar of expectations. And this is what he said about this. He lists 13 of them. He said mediocrity is not optional. Attitude is important. Strong work ethic is essential. Accountability is always should be expected. Relational intelligence is necessary. You got to set aside your ego. Collaboration is a must. Expect creativity and innovation. Seek the balance between consistency and flexibility. Things we've already talked about. Isn't that amazing? Expect speed in decision making and action. We can't drag our feet forever. Number 11, people must trust your motives. We got to trust one another. You must set the example. If we're going to raise the bar, we'll always provide an award and recognition. You got any muffins left back there? So I'll let you get a muffin when you leave. Concluding thoughts, we'll take our post-test, and I want to just describe the next several meetings that people that might be involved. The more leaders you involve in the process, the greater will be their ownership of the results. And that's the bottom line. So I'm going to hand out the post-test. Fill this out, but before you leave, I just want to, again, clarify your team, your meeting time. A few of them's changed. Just make sure everybody understands where they're at, and we'll meet with the ministry. Yeah, you can take your binders with you now. You know, of course, you can bring them back whenever you meet if you want. There we go.
You don't have anything you're going to put in?
No, I don't have anything else.